Welcome back to Breaking Spines, the miscellaneous book review show for reviewing miscellaneous books. Now, one of the main reasons I started this project was to force myself to read genres I would normally never pick up. I like to think I'm more well-read than most, but there are still plenty of literary blind spots that I could be filling. One of those is historical romance. Oh, sure, I've read the classics. I've read my Jane Eyre and my Wuthering Heights, the foundation tiles on which modern historical romances are built upon, but I haven't actually touched on anything from the 20th century onward. Which brings us to today's subject, The Time of the Hunter's Moon by Victoria Holt. Published in 1983 by Doubleday Books, this Victorian-era set book follows Cordelia Grant, a young woman who finds herself the new schoolmistress at a girls' academy housed in an ancient monastery. During this time, two mysterious men enter her life, neither of whom are what they seem, and it's up to Cordelia to piece together the clues and figure out just what is going on. The first man is Edward Compton. It is said that when one goes to Pilcher's Peak on the night of the hunter's moon, one will meet the man they are destined to marry. It sounds silly, but Cordelia is overwhelmed when meeting the handsome Edward Compton there, and even more so when Compton shows a strong interest in her. But just as quickly as he arrived, Compton vanishes, and when Cordelia investigates his whereabouts, she discovers that Compton died decades ago in a fire. Did Cordelia just fall in love with a ghost? The second man is Jason Veringer, the land baron who owns the school. Cordelia arrives just after Veringer's disabled wife passes away, and there's rumor going around that Veringer murdered her so that he could marry his mistress, a theater actress from London. Cordelia takes all of this as mere gossip until Veringer begins to show a lot of interest in her, and soon finds herself wrapped up in the plot. Cordelia is now stuck between two suitors, one who may be a damned spirit forced to walk the earth for all time, the other who may be a vicious murderer with demon blood running through his veins. All that, and she's in charge of the school play. There's a lot of different things going on in The Time of the Hunter's Moon. It spins a lot of plates, and not everything really goes together. For example, the stuff about Cordelia learning to be a headmistress, getting to know her students and figure out when to be firm and when to be charitable, none of that has much to do with the mystery and romance stuff. The only thing thematically that really ties it all together is a vague idea of Gothic fantasy. We can't just have a girls' school. It has to take place in a creepy old castle lit by torches where the wind groans through the cracks like the whispered prayers of long-dead monks. We can't just have a moment where two people drink and chat on a balcony. It has to be a pitch-dark night while bats fly overhead. Mansions with secret rooms and fog-covered horse trails are the order of the day. If this book has one thing going for it, is that it's dripping in atmosphere. However, this book does something I did not expect by offering a strong counterpoint to that atmosphere. Cordelia has an Aunt Patty, an always cheerful, dotting middle-aged woman who lives with her friend Violet in a small countryside town, and every so often Cordelia and maybe a few other characters go down for a visit. These segments are about as far from Gothic romance as you can get. It's all very green countryside and colorful flower gardens and ridiculous two-story hats. Victoria Holt, which is actually one of 8 pen names for Eleanor Hibbert, she seemed fond of detailed, almost flowery descriptions that, in these segments, give off a lot of warmth and calmness. It's basically the prose version of a Thomas Kinkade painting, which by itself might not be all that interesting, but becomes so when contrasted by the darker and more sinister settings and plots that make up the other 2/3 of the book. It almost gives the book a beat. Gothic, pretty flowers, murder, ghosts, let's make pudding, conspiracy, adultery, gardening, something like that. The book moves at a very quick pace as well. There's little time for superfluous moments. We have to get to every major set piece as reasonably quickly as possible. One chapter begins with the start of Christmas vacation and ends with Easter vacation, and these aren't huge chapters. It really does just move that fast. I don't mind that. I kind of like it. This is a book that knows what it needs to focus on and tries to get to those moments as quickly as possible. And while I do love books with small character moments as much as the next person, sometimes a bit of brevity is welcome, and there's enough style here that you barely notice everything's going at Mach 3. Unfortunately, this is a case of style over substance, because the plot and characters of the Time of the Hunter's Moon suck. They suck so bad. Cordelia is a very passive main character. Everything seems to be decided for her by other people. From big things like career paths to tiny details like what she'll wear for dinner that night. There's no reason for it. It's not that she's shown to be incompetent and needs that kind of hand-holding. Now, I would argue that there are rare exceptions in which passive protagonists are okay, and Sweep Me Off My Feet romance stories are potentially one of those. I'm talking the uncomplicated, hyper-romantic, the fates bring us together, Fabio on the cover fantasies, which, no, aren't the most feminist thing in the world, but as long as the reader is a normal human being who can tell the difference between fantasy and reality, I don't see the harm in it. But the romance here is not typical. It is in fact rather disgusting. The Edward Compton stuff really only bookends this story. The main focus is on Jason Veringer, and Veringer is a grade A shitheel. Even ignoring the maybe being a murderer thing, Veringer is arrogant, selfish, a womanizer with a hot temper, just a total dick. Because he owns the land the school sits on, he's able to pretty much manipulate the entire staff into pleasing him out of fear that he'll close down the school. The few times he's called out on his behavior, he'll either write it off as just the kind of things men do, or blame his ancestry. He's got this crappy story about how one of his ancestors slept with Satan and thus he has demon blood in him, which, if you're unclear on this, is not an excuse. This guy, as a potential suitor for Cordelia, makes Edward Cullen look well-adjusted. Veringer ranks 3.9 on the Gaston scale, and I haven't even brought up the rape scene. Jason Veringer attempts to rape Cordelia. He does not succeed, but he still tries, and it gets brushed off. And no, it wasn't implied to be something else. The word rape is used very clearly in this book. Cordelia herself is well aware of what he tried to do to her, and her romantic attraction to this man only increases. You're not helping, Holt. Damn it, I'm only 5 episodes into this series, and 4 of these books have had rape in them. In many ways, though, this is the worst of them, because at least Vertical Run or The Hunger were aimed at full-blown adults. The age demographic for this kind of story is probably young adults, teenage girls. And the one thing you probably shouldn't be saying to teenage girls is, rape is just kind of a nuisance and easily forgivable. Look, I get that those Bront sisters and their romance novels from the 19th century didn't always show off the healthiest of relationships either, but this is 1983. We can do better. The final insult to Cordelia's lack of agency is the finale, in which all the mysteries are solved and the bad guy is confronted. Cordelia has nothing to do with it. She's in fact in a different country from where the climax of the goddamn story is taking place. And since the book is in first person, we don't get to see any of it. We have to hear about it second hand. How does that even happen? There's no way an editor didn't approach Holt and was all like, hey, maybe we should have her main character at least witness the climax of her own story, if not participate in it. And then Cordelia doesn't really fall in love with any of her suitors so much as she settles. And I never want to read another Gothic romance again. Blah. Would I recommend The Time of the Hunter's Moon? Well, I did walk away from this kind of interested in Holt's other works. She's great at descriptions and seems to have her own way of pacing things. And I can't imagine all of her books have needless, insulting rape scenes in them. No, I don't recommend this book. It crashes and burns when it comes to characters and plot, and the ending is inexcusable. If this is the standard for this genre, I'm glad I've been giving it a miss this whole time. Well, that's it for this video, but not for this book, because join me tomorrow for the next episode of Breaking Spines, in which I talk about The Time of the Hunter's Moon a second time. How? Why? Well, you'll just have to stay tuned to find out.